Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. Today, we will be taking a look at Eastern Michigan Eagles, who finished 6-7 in the Mid American Conference, or the MAC, and made an appearance in the 68 Ventures Bowl. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 12th. We have a special guest joining us today. Please welcome to the show Tom Helmer, the voice of Eastern Michigan play-by-play and the co-host of the Eastern Insider podcast. Welcome, Tom.
I'll tell you what, if that open doesn't fire you up, nothing will. That was great. That was fantastic.
Hopefully there's some memories that are brought back from some of those plays that you saw.
Well, of course, you had a lot of highlights from that Illinois game where Chad Ryland hit the game winner at the end of the ball game there to beat Illinois. That was a big one. Eastern Michigan's had a lot of success against the Power 5, which I guess now is the Power 4 plus Oregon State and Washington State.
They're kind of in no man's land. That's what we call them. Like, they're not really G5. They're not really P4.
Yeah, they're their own two-man conference.
Yeah. So, hey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you into getting involved with Eastern Michigan athletics?
Well, I'm a Michigan native, but when I graduated high school, I moved west and played some junior college football out in Phoenix, Arizona, and then went to a school called California Lutheran University and finished up my playing career there. And then that kind of got me into broadcasting, and I cut my teeth at a TV station in LA and local news as a sportscaster, producer, and just kind of expanded from there. And I was working out in Denver, and the wife and I decided we wanted to come back to Michigan, at least for a little while. And it just so happened as we were moving, the job opened up at Eastern Michigan, and I applied for the job and got it. And now I'm calling football and men's and women's basketball at EMU. And that role looks to expand next year to baseball and lacrosse and soccer. So I'm all in on the green and white.
All right. Are you being a Michigander? Are you a troll? Are you above the bridge? Where were you in?
Oh no, yeah. I mean, above the bridge is the Upper Peninsula. That's like over 4 hours from here. So
okay.
But I'm down in the Ypsilanti is 7 miles east of Ann Arbor. That's where I'm at.
But so is that where you're from, though?
So I'm from a town called Saline, which is directly attached to the southern part of Ann Arbor. So
okay,
when the flyby goes by for Michigan football games, the planes go over my house or the blimp will circle over. So we're right in the flight pattern of Michigan Stadium.
I spent 4 or 5 years over in Kalamazoo as my wife attended grad school there at Western.
Nice, yeah.
So, all right.
All right, jumping right into some Eastern Michigan football. So they lose a lot of returning production from last year's offense. Kind of starts at the quarterback position where last year's starter, Austin Smith, has moved on to Austin Peay. But they do bring in former MAC foe and Buffalo starter Cole Snyder, as well as return Ike Ndegwu III. Kind of how did that competition shape up in the spring? How did those two guys look?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't think there is a competition. Cole Snyder is going to be the starter on this team, and it's the reason they brought him over from Buffalo. As I understand it, Buffalo told Cole Snyder going into the offseason they were going to recruit some guys, and they wanted him to compete this year. And he thought, listen, I've thrown for over 5,000 yards in the last 2 seasons. I don't know what else I can show you. So he went into the portal. Eastern Michigan got him. He's played great football in the spring, and really – he's the one guy Eastern Michigan has that has game experience and really can manage Chris Creighton's offense. Ike Ndegwu, he got in 4 games last year, didn't go well. He was 13 of 31, threw a couple interceptions, didn't have any touchdown passes, really struggled throwing the football. He was on the depth chart in spring ball. He was 3rd on the depth chart, but he's a guy that's a very talented quarterback room. So it's going to be hard for Ndegwu to get back on the field. Cole Snyder is exactly who EMU wants to go into those first 2 tough road games. You open at UMass against Don Brown and what will be a tough defense at UMass. Then the next week you fly across the country to Seattle to take on a Washington Huskies team that, last year they were decent. I know they lost some people, but that's a tough road game.
They lost a lot of people.
A ton of people. And that's, Kalen DeBoer was the offensive coordinator at Eastern Michigan under Chris Creighton. So they had a relationship, and that's not why that game was scheduled. But we thought, all right, Eastern Michigan's going to go to Washington. If nothing else, if DeBoer keeps that team, maybe they'll be nice enough not run us out of the stadium with a team that went to the national title game. But now DeBoer's gone. Everything's blown up. So it'll be interesting because Chris Creighton is from back that way. So that'll be an important game to him. You guys know as well as anybody, he gets fired up for those Power 5 games and has a lot of Power 5 wins. So it'll be interesting.
Absolutely.
And come next year, that UMass game is a conference game, right?
Correct.
What?
Yeah. So they come into that 2025 season in conference play. It'll be interesting because the conference just got away from having divisions and went to pods. So Eastern Michigan is in a schedule pod with Western Michigan and Central Michigan, meaning those are the only two guaranteed two teams in the conference you would play every year. So UMass is going to curveball that a little bit. But the thinking behind the scheduling and losing the conferences was you play everybody home and away at least once in a 3-year period. So you get a better rotation of playing around the conference. I've been here since 2019. I've never called a game in Ohio. So we are playing at Athens, Ohio this year. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the scheduling. But Amherst is not easy to get to either. So it'll be really interesting, especially for basketball when they travel out that way. So welcome UMass. They were in the conference before. They're back. So it'll be interesting.
Trying to read between the lines here when you're talking about the quarterbacks. So my assumption, and maybe it's wrong, is that maybe Minnesota transfer Drew Viato is the number 2 quarterback coming out of spring.
So Jeremiah Salem was on the depth chart at number 2. He's a guy we had last year that can really sling the rock. And this is a guy that all the receivers in the offense love this guy. His grandfather played on the national championship team at Minnesota back in the day, was the backup quarterback there. Jeremiah is the guy that the receivers at Pro Day asked to come out and throw to him. That's how good a thrower he is. He can really zip the ball. So he was number 2 on the depth chart. But you mentioned Drew Viato. He's a guy that's a transfer from the University of Minnesota. He's had a good spring. But as you look at the way the quarterbacks will line up, Cole Snyder has the experience. That's who they need at quarterback to get them out of the gate. Now, Chris Creighton will be the first guy to tell you he has never gone through a football season with one quarterback. One inevitably gets hurt, and you got to put a second one in there. How that will line up behind Cole Snyder is anybody's guess. But Jeremiah Salem, tremendous quarterback. Drew Viato, the transfer from Minnesota, another great quarterback, but has never played in a college game, never got a snap at Minnesota. Jay Stuckey is a freshman they brought in. In fact, they brought him onto the team at the bowl game last year. He actually practiced the day before the bowl game. He couldn't be in uniform down there in Mobile, but he was with the team. He's had a good spring, and the guy can run. He busted off a 65-yard touchdown run in the spring game, so that the kid can scoot. It's the most talented group of quarterbacks I've seen in one room since I arrived on campus in 2019. So a lot of good arms there.
So moving on to the running game, another question mark for this offense. They lose the top 3 rushers from a year ago, and Samson Evans to graduation. Jalen Jackson goes to Iowa State. The aforementioned Austin Smith. But not all hope is lost. They do bring in Delbert Mims III from NC State, and Bryson Moss returns. How did that running back room look this spring?
So the running back room is going to be interesting. You mentioned Mims, who's the transfer from North Carolina State. And I think sometimes when you hear a transfer coming from a power school, you get excited about it. But Mims was not on the depth chart in the spring game. He was not one of the top 2 running backs. Chris Creighton is going to be limited how much, they were limited a little bit in the spring. He tried to lay off the contact a little bit. Eastern Michigan is redoing the turf in their stadium. They're going to have a brand new field in 2024. That old turf was hard. They did do a little practice in the bubble. They even got out on the grass one time, I think. But they didn't do a ton of contact. They had a couple scrimmages. So when you look at the running back situation, it's kind of hard to get a real gauge on where they're going to be back running-wise. Mims, as I mentioned, was not on the depth chart for the spring game. Dante McMillan, who played in a couple games last year and handled some kick returns, he was number 1 on the depth chart. Elijah Jackson Anderson, who played a little bit last year too. Those were the 2 top backs. But nobody really exploded in camp, and you thought to yourself, all right, these are the guys that are going to be the running backs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that position unfolds as they move towards fall camp.
Do you think McMillan, snap one, game one, he's the back that's first out there?
You know, I think it's anybody's job. I think it's going to be a competition in through the fall, and I think Eastern Michigan's not done shopping. I think, you know, with the portal open, they're always looking to try and improve themselves in different positions. And if somebody pops up running back wise that they think can improve them in that backfield, I think they're going to go for it.
So last season, Eastern Michigan seemed to take this committee approach with the running back room. Do you expect that heavy rotation again here in 2024, or do you think they'll have that quote unquote workhorse back?
Well, you know, I wouldn't say they necessarily went by committee last year. It looks like that statistically, but really Samson Evans was supposed to be the primary back in that offense. He had a tremendous season the year before, but as he came into last season, he really had some knee issues. And he had a game the year before against Arizona State where he ran for well over 200 yards and helped Eastern Michigan beat the Sun Devils. But almost from that point, knee issues started to flare up. So all last year, his knees were a problem. So they really relied on Jalen Jackson and Samson Evans and used them together as if they were one back. Short yarded situations, Evans was in there, never got knocked backwards. He's a guy, you need 2 or 3 yards. It was Samson Evans. Jalen Jackson was a guy that when he got loose out in the open field, he was a real problem for defenses. I think if Chris Creighton had a primary back that he liked, he'd leave them there as much as possible. But if you have one guy that's good at pass protection, one guy that's good at receiving the football, one guy that's that really, you know, north-south runner, then he'll use a combination of running backs to get that job done. So it'll be interesting to see how that position race unfolds and really who they want to go with. Because I really get the feeling that Eastern Michigan wants to run the football quite a bit in this upcoming season. So that's going to be one to watch.
One quick thing I wanted to ask you. You said they're redoing the field, so is it going to still be gray, or is the color changing?
The actual playing surface will still be gray. Max Crosby stroked a check for the new turf, so they had visited with him out in Las Vegas, and Max Crosby's had a wonderful career, had a great career at Eastern Michigan. He's only 26 years old, but he's hit it big, and so it'll be Max Crosby Field in the upcoming season. But what they've done too is Eastern Michigan had that track going around the field. They've ripped out the track and they're basically turfing all the way to the stands on both sides. So this will be this huge ocean of green out there with that gray field in the middle. So the gray stays. As long as Chris Creighton is here, I think the field's going to remain gray. And I'm sure you guys know the story of why it's gray.
We don't.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's cool. It's cool to look at for sure.
Well, on TV, I feel like the TV's broken when I'm looking at it.
Well, it looks like a black and white game when you watch, for sure.
It does. And sometimes, like Eastern was playing Buffalo one year, and Buffalo was wearing gray uniforms with a blue helmet, and we had on like whites with a gray helmet. I was like, it looks like the TV's broken. But here's why the field is gray. Chris Creighton got here in 2014, and during one of the early spring practices, it started to snow a little bit. And some players were kind of griping about the weather. And Chris Creighton said, listen, this is a new era, and I don't care what kind of weather we play in or where we play somebody. I don't care if it's in a parking lot with broken glass. We're going to bring it. Then he got the idea, let's play in a parking lot. So that's why it's gray. It's supposed to be a parking lot there at the factory, and it's parking lot gray. And that's going to be the color as long as Chris Creighton is running the show at the factory.
I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think you'll have to worry about gray uniforms on a gray turf anymore. Because I feel like the NCAA recently passed a rule where you can't wear whatever color the turf is. You can't wear the same color. That's what I thought, but I could be.
It was originally like a Boise State rule. Boise State was wearing blue on blue turf, and I think the Mountain West Conference was giving them some grief about that. But finally, they said you can wear blue on blue. We wore gray on the gray, so it's funny when you're at the game. And the field doesn't consume your whole field of vision, you don't really notice it that much. It doesn't, right. The uniforms pop a little more. It's when you're watching it just on TV that you're like, something seems a little off with this TV. But they're sticking with the gray. So the playing surface will still be gray.
All right, getting back to some football here. In 2023, the passing game seemed to struggle a little bit, and they're also faced with replacing leading wide receiver Tanner Canoe and third leading wide receiver Hamza El Zayet. They do bring in some transfer help. They bring in Porter Rooks from NC State, Tyler Walton from McFo, Ohio, and then JB Mitchell III also returns as well. What can you tell us about that wide receiver room?
I can tell you that nobody really shined in spring ball. I think it was a bit of a question mark. JB Mitchell was a little banged up this spring, so we didn't see a whole lot of him. As for the rest of the receiving corps, nobody really stood out. This is an area EMU may try and address before fall camp. You mentioned Porter Rooks from North Carolina State. He hasn't earned the starting job yet. He was listed second on the depth chart behind Tyler Lockett, who was a transfer from Michigan State a year ago. And Tyler Walton from Ohio is another guy you mentioned. He wasn't listed on the depth chart at all. Now, they brought in a new receiving coach in Grant Hurd. He had previously coached at Central Florida. He had worked at Indiana under Allen's staff there. And watching him in practices, you can tell he's been a little frustrated in the early going with this receiving core. A lot of drop passes out there. He demands excellent at that wide receiver position. And we just didn't see anybody make a great separation over those 15 days of practice that you would think to yourself, all right, here's your 1, 2, and 3 guys in a passing formation. So that's one. That competition is going to continue right up till game day.
I assume the answer to this question is yes, just because Cole Snyder's there. But I would assume you expect some improved production from the passing game in 2024.
Yeah, and that's why I expect some improved passing production, because the quarterback room last year really struggled to get the ball to the wide receivers. Alex Smith got injured a couple times. Aiku Dingwu came in. He had trouble getting the ball to receivers. Cameron McCoy, who's also a pitcher on the Eastern Michigan team, and I think has decided that he's just going to stay with baseball, also struggled to throw the football. So Tanner Canoe, Hamza El Zayat, great wide receivers. They had a fantastic pro day, and it's very possible that some NFL teams might invite them into a rookie camp. We're great wide receivers with quarterbacks who struggle to get them the ball. This year, it's almost flipped. You got great quarterbacks and receivers that need to do a better job of catching the football. But I don't think the passing game has anywhere to go but up. So Cole Snyder will lead that charge. So I do think you'll see an improved passing game out of Eastern Michigan.
So if there's some opportunity for growth there in the wide receiver room, do you think that the tight end group will be utilized more in the passing game, or will it be similar to what it was in 2023?
I don't think a Chris Creighton offense really lends itself a ton to the tight ends. In fact, I went back and looked at their stats, and Jerry Getzinger and Blake Daniels between them averaged about a touch a game. So they didn't get a lot of balls. It was probably, I think Daniels had 13 receptions. Jerry Getzinger had 16 receptions. Now, that may have changed if Andreas Posca had stayed healthy all season. He injured his knee early in the season on special teams play, and he's a guy that has since transferred to Arkansas. So Getzinger and Daniels are back. They like good blocking tight ends. Those guys can handle that chore. As far as, a receiver that's going to bust off 5-6 catches a game, it just hasn't been the thing. Maybe that's another thing that changes with Cole Snyder, but I don't expect a huge ramped up difference out of the tight ends for Eastern Michigan.
Can you tell us a little bit about how Florida transfer Jonathan Odom looked
Remains to be seen. He's behind those 2 guys on the depth chart. Didn't really do anything that I saw to separate himself depth chart wise in the spring. So that's kind of a wait and see thing. That's another one too. You get a guy, he's coming from Florida.
Right,
He's going to be a big difference maker, but it's still Division I football. And sometimes you got to have your head on straight and realize what you're getting yourself into. And I think he could be fantastic for Eastern Michigan, but so far I haven't seen that giant separation. Again, on the depth, he wasn't even on the depth chart for the spring game. It was Getzinger and Daniels.
Much like the rest of the offense, they do lose some offensive line production with Alex Howie and Brian Dooley graduating and Zach Conti transferring. What did they do to kind of shore up that offensive line this spring? And, how did they look in general?
Offensive line is coming along. They got pushed around a little bit by the defense in spring ball, but at center, they got a couple guys who played some last year in Broderick Roman and Carson Lee. Carson Lee's a kid out of the Denver area that he's got legs like redwood trees. I mean, the guy is strong for sure. And he did a lot of training with Drake Nugent, who was the starting center for Michigan this past season. That'll be going to the NFL draft. The two of them are from the same area in Colorado and worked out with a guy named Matt McChesney, who used to play college ball at Colorado and then played in the NFL for a while. So Lee's got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge behind him. So he'll be good in that center position. Left guard might be where they're in the best shape. Mickey Revolinsky should start there. Has had a lot of playing experience. Chris Mayo is going to be out there at left tackle. He was a backup last season. And then the right side of the line has some position battles going on that will probably go into fall camp. But all in all, if that offensive line can mesh and they get some guys that had a little bit of experience this year to really come out of the gate strong this season, it could be a high point for him. Could be.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who would that be for Eastern Michigan?
If I had to pick an offensive player, I might go with a lineman, Doji Dehue. He's 6'9", 295 out of West Africa. I don't know how many times you've heard that. He's only played football for 2 years at Santa Rosa Junior College, but he has a huge frame. He has a lot of talent. He's raw on that offensive line, but his dad is from West Africa. His mom is from France. I had a chance to meet the two of them. They came to a spring practice, and I said, how does a kid in West Africa end up playing football in the United States? And they said he came to us and said, I want to play football in the United States and play in the NFL. And so he came over to the U.S., 2 years of junior college ball. He got a lot of looks. He made a visit to Eastern Michigan, absolutely fell in love with Ypsilanti and the campus, and he called his folks and said, this feels like home. So his parents made the 24-hour trip or something from West Africa to come out, watch practice and watch a live scrimmage. And so he's a guy that could really pop for him on the offensive line and end up being a big piece for him.
Do you think you said he's raw. Do you think he excels more in the running or passing game?
I think for him, the running game so far, the passing game takes a little more technique and stepping back and being good on your feet like that. Running game wise, he's just such an imposing figure. I like when I'm standing out at practice, I can look across the field and I can see his entire head above everybody else. My son's works with the athletic training staff at Eastern Michigan. He's a student there, and he goes, I think he's 7 foot, Dad. I mean, he's so big, and but he's fun to watch. A couple false starts here or there that in the spring ball, but he's adjusting well. So I'll be curious to see how it plays out for him.
Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, where last season the pass defense led the way. They ranked 46, only giving up 213 passing yards per game. The run defense did not fare as well. They ranked 122nd, giving up 188.6 yards per game. What did the Eastern Michigan Eagles do in the offseason to try to particularly shore up that run defense?
Well, part of it is Ben Needham, the defensive coordinator, got in the lab, and he'll look at ways to try and limit the run this season. Part of that was they were so good at defending the passes. You pointed out the stats that teams would start running, and we played some teams that had some good running quarterbacks that would cause some problems, that would run an option or get loose inside. So as you were dropping guys off in coverage and these quarterbacks would get loose, Daquan Finn at Toledo is one of those examples who can run and throw the football. So I think they'll do a good job up front. I think they're going to be good. They returned some starters up there, and they should have some real talent on that defensive side of the ball, which they're going to need for a tough MAC schedule.
The defensive line lost a few players to the transfer portal, but they do return Peyton Price and Joey Zielinski, amongst others. How did they look this spring, and did anyone step up that could help this defense?
Listen, the defensive line looked really good, especially in the spring game, where you start thinking, are they that good, or does the offensive line need a little bit of work? And it could be both, but
it's hard. It's hard to judge that, I think, in a spring game. It's so hard.
It's easy because defense, see ball, get ball. There's not as much to learn there. And when you have offense and new quarterbacks coming in and they're trying to, it was funny to watch them work because you can use the radio helmets this year.
Yep.
So they're trying to use that instead of signaling in plays, but still get guys in the right formation and communicate through the headset. So the offense was working through a lot in the spring and really diving into that playbook to learn what they needed to learn. The defense was, he snapped the ball, go kill him. So it was working out pretty good for the defense. You mentioned Peyton Price, Joey Zielinski, but they also returned Malik Tullis. They've got Justin Jefferson who can rush off the edge. So there's actually a lot of experience up front for Eastern Michigan and a lot of talent there. So they should be pretty good up front.
They also got an Arizona State transfer, James. I don't know if it's DeJoncum.
Yeah.
Joncum. What did he? How did he look, and what kind of role do you expect for him in 2024?
Well, first of all, how did he look? He looks like a player you would create in Madden. He looks photoshopped. The guy is a walking. It's like I could work out my entire life and never look like this guy. He's like a robot. He's humongous. But they've got him at middle linebacker. So he's not on the line. He's a middle linebacker, but he's currently second on the depth chart. So we'll see how things shake out for him as he goes along. But he is a huge human being, and he just looks like a guy that if he hit you, your whole ancestry would feel it. So it'll be interesting to see how he plays in the fall.
Speaking about the linebackers, you lose Joe Sparacio, Chase Klein, some other guys that they brought in. One that I would have expected to kind of be the guy in the middle would have been J.T. Killen over from Coastal Carolina. They also brought Luke Murphy. What can you tell us about those guys and maybe some of the returning linebackers?
Well, you're replacing probably the best 1-2 linebacker punch maybe Eastern Michigan has ever had with Sparacio and Klein. It seemed like every play, one of those guys was in on the tackle. So what you do is you hit the portal. You mentioned J.T. Killen from Coastal Carolina. They went out and got Luke Murphy from Kent State, were great gets for the Eagles. Both guys played well. Both guys were playing weak side linebacker this spring.
Okay.
So they were both in the same position. I don't know if that'll change in the fall. They brought in Zion Fanua, who's from Tyler Junior College in Texas, and Joncum, who you talked about from Arizona State. Those two guys were playing middle linebacker. So they went out, they went shopping, and they got themselves 4 really talented linebackers that have some huge shoes to fill.
In terms of returning production, the defensive backfield seems to have made out fairly well. They did lose Kempton Shine, but brought back mostly everybody else. They were very effective as a unit in 2023. What do you think we can expect for this unit here in 2024?
Well, you should expect him to be one of the top secondaries in the MAC this season. Kempton Shine, I talked to him last year. We were talking about this defense. He goes, this is the most talented group of defensive backs I've ever played with. And so with really him being the only one walking out the door, it's a very athletic group. They can fly around in the backfield. They make things crazy for the quarterback. Plus, they get Joshua Scott back. Joshua Scott separated his shoulder in the last fall scrimmage last year and missed pretty much the entire season. He tried to go for a couple games, including Minnesota. I was watching him during warmups. He has this huge shoulder brace on. His arm is barely hanging on. And he goes, well, I should see if it works. So he just absolutely popped somebody on our own team in warmups, and it popped out of place. And they're like, you're done. We got to get this thing to heal. So with Joshua Scott back, it really boosts that defense.
If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Daquan White. I don't think there's any second guess in that. He may be the best corner in the MAC this season. There were some who thought that he might jump to a power school last year, or somebody was going to try and pick him off, but luckily he's back in Ypsilanti. He's 5'10", 163 pounds. He can shut it down on the corner. He had a great freshman year. Sky's really the limit for him, and I think quarterbacks will find out quickly if you want to have success in the passing game. He's a guy you probably want to stay away from because he is an absolute ball hawk.
Now that the spring practice is over, and we're recording this on April 15th, so the portal officially opens tomorrow, the 16th. Which position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning?
All right, let's assume that everybody has stayed at Eastern Michigan or no one has come in, that this is the one rare opportunity where you didn't take advantage of the portal. I still think offensive line's a big question mark, especially that right side of the offensive line, because really that's the anchor. I mean, you can't throw the ball, run the ball, do anything if the offensive line can't get it done. You want to make sure you got guys up there that can push people around. I think that's a position that Eastern Michigan will keep their eyes open. Anytime you can try and improve there on that offensive line, you'll do it. But I saw Brian Dooley, who graduated. He's hoping to hear his name called in the draft here coming up. He's talked to the guys. The offensive line feels good about where they're at. They know they could play a little better football. So it'll be interesting to see the jump they make from spring to fall. But that's a bit of a question mark, I think, for EMU.
So let's say they do dabble with the transfer portal and they are able to bring somebody in. Is it offensive line and another position, or is it just mainly focusing on maybe offensive line?
Have you ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross with Alec Baldwin when he's talking to the salespeople? Have you heard of that movie?
I have not.
Yeah.
Justice,
Okay,
you're in. All right, Justice.
All right. So there's a scene in there where he's really lighting up the salespeople. And he looks over at the board and he goes, it's all about A, B, C. A always, B, B, C closing. Always be closing. I think for Eastern Michigan and teams of the like, it's ABS. A always, BBS shopping. Always be shopping. They're always looking in the transfer portal. So I think you see what's out there. The way the recruiting goes now, you don't just recruit guys you can try and get out of high school. You build relationship with players from the state, the area, so that if they do go off, you got like a Drew Viato that goes to Minnesota, then he decides, you know what, I don't think it's going to work out for me here in Minnesota. Hey, how'd you like to come home? You played at Walled Lake High School here in Michigan. You want to come back and play in the Ypsilanti? Yeah, I do. Cole Snyder was even a guy that the only time he'd ever been to Ypsi before he signed was when he played against him. So his folks and him, the only time he saw the campus was the football game he played against Eastern Michigan. He signed sight unseen, but he liked what he saw at Eastern Michigan and built a relationship with the coaching staff through recruiting. So, I think you fill any spot you can get. It's the only way you can survive, especially in this group of five now, because it's become a revolving door. In fact, I think one strategy group of five schools should use is become a swinging door with other schools. Like, say
we've talked about that before.
Yeah, like say you paired
you have
up
some kind of relationship with them,
right? We had we had a quarterback that had transferred from Cincinnati, then went back to Cincinnati, and my thought was, all right, let's keep that going. You gave us a quarterback, give us a quarterback, a left tackle to help him keep upright. We'll play him, develop him for a year. We'll get him back to you. He's got game experience. He's ready to go. You could make those kind of relationships with some Power 5 schools that I think would benefit both ways, because, maybe Michigan State wants to sign a kid, but they're worried that he's not going to play and then he may want to jump. Well, here's the deal, kid. You're going to go over and play in Ypsilanti this season. You'll get some experience. You have a ton of talent, and this way some of these group of five schools could get athletes maybe they normally wouldn't get, and it would kind of boost your profile conference-wise, help you win some games, develop the kid, and not leave you always out there searching for everything and battling everybody else for that. And that may be a way things go. Maybe eventually schools will start marrying up with bigger schools and they'll become essentially the JC for that school, if you will.
What would you say is the main strength of this team going into 2024?
Special teams. We got a great special teams. Mitchell Tomasek is probably one of the best punters in the country, and one that makes me nervous every time the transfer portal opens, because you worry somebody's going to try and steal this kid at some point. He's got 2 years of eligibility left, and it was fun watching him kick in the indoor practice field because it's a bubble, and he has to lay off a little bit so he doesn't keep hitting the ceiling when he punts the football. But he's got a tremendous leg, tremendous athlete. And he does a great job of flipping the field. I think it was at Jacksonville State. He punted 177 yards. So he's got a monster leg. Now, Jesus Gomez has a leg like a hammer. The problem is he's dealt a lot with injuries, but he's kicked a couple 55-yard field goals at Eastern Michigan already, and he really came on the heels of Chad Ryland, who's in the NFL now. So when he's healthy and he can kick, it really expands, that, or shrinks the field. Really, you don't have to get as close as you normally would to hit some of those field goals. If Gomez continues to have leg troubles, Kenyon Boyer has kicked really well too. So the only real question might be long snapper. Steve Bird, who never missed a snap in the last 2 seasons, was absolutely perfect, graduated. And so now the next generation of long snappers are coming in. So we'll see if they can continue a trend at Eastern Michigan. We're really about the past 4 years, they haven't had a bad snap. So let's hope that continues.
So when it comes to NIL, you're recruiting, your fresh or your seniors coming in, but sometimes you have to keep the guys on your own team, and you have to recruit your own team year in and year out now. How has NIL and the transfer portal impacted Eastern Michigan in particular?
It's funny. I was just talking to the athletic director, Scott Weatherby, today about that. And we were talking, there is a collective now for Eastern Michigan. So they're going to be able to, if you come to Eastern Michigan, they'll sell your jersey with a name on it. You get 30% of those sales. So they are pairing up with the athletes and doing their best to get them NIL money. They have great track and field at Eastern Michigan too. And it's been some of those, it's tough when you have an Adidas school, if some of those runners want to wear Nike or another brand, because you can't wear that in competition because they're an Adidas school. But Eastern Michigan has worked out a plan over the last couple of years to start pushing to the forefront of NIL to help improve athletics across their 19 sports. So they're actually in a good spot, I think, compared to most Group of Fives.
That's great to hear.
It seems more and more in just college football in general, the head coach is just taking on more and more tasks, whether it be, recruiting, player retention, fundraising, NIL stuff. And it's kind of like they're really more of a general manager nowadays maybe not as involved in the X's and O's. Are you seeing that at Eastern Michigan, or are they doing things to try to help that workload so they can still be, a head coach?
Well, I mean, Chris Creighton's heavily involved in the X's and O's, but when you asked that question, it took me back. I used to work for Fox Sports. I used to do a college football show with Gary Barnett and Eddie George. And even back then, Gary Barnett talked, when you're a head coach at a Division I school, you are a CEO because you have to, talk with donors and boosters and fans, but you also have to recruit, and you got to worry about the X's and O's, and you have to be a dad to these players, and you have to wear a lot of hats. It's a year-round job, and I think Chris Creighton does a very good job with that. And I think he's done a good job at evolving over his 10 years at Eastern Michigan. He'd never coached at the Division I level before arriving at Ypsilanti, and he took a team and a program, that at a couple different points in their history, the MAC wanted to kick out, or the school considered just dropping the program altogether. They said football couldn't work here. And Chris Creighton got them to a point where they're winning enough games to go to bowl games. And now he's trying everything he can do. It's time to take the next step. 2 seasons ago, they ended up winning 9 football games in a season. That specific number of wins had never happened for Eastern Michigan ever. They'd never won exactly 9 games in a season. And it was the first time they won a bowl game. They beat San Jose, or second time. They beat San Jose State in the Potato Bowl. Now, we love San Jose State because Eastern Michigan has only won 2 bowl games ever, and they're both against San Jose State. One was the California Bowl in '87, and then one was in the Potato Bowl 2 years ago. So it's time to compete, get yourselves to Detroit and try and win a MAC title. And I think Chris Creighton is feeling the pressure that, listen, you've raised the bar at Eastern Michigan, but now it's time to raise it again. Everybody's gotten used to going to bowl games. Now they want to go to bowl games and win bowl games, and they'd like to go to Detroit, go to Ford Field and play for the MAC championship. And it's a tough conference to win week in and week out. So they brought in 46 new guys for, this past season. Almost half the roster has flipped with new guys. So I was a little worried after the bowl game when they'd lost to South Alabama, and I thought, boy, we're losing a lot of talent here. And then they went out and, just recruited their backsides off and brought in a lot of talent. So it'll be interesting.
So you kind of talk about those expectations. The dust is settled. 2024 is over. what does success look like? What has to happen here in 2024 for Tom and the fans of Eastern Michigan to say this was a successful season?
You got to be in the hunt for a MAC title. You haven't won one since 1987. You've won one. It was 1987. And when you go to a bowl game, you got to win it. You got to start winning bowl games. The just winning enough to get there and just going to bowl games isn't going to cut it in Ypsilanti anymore. And I think there's this just feeling that if this staff can't do it, they'll find a staff that can. But that's the whole part of growth. When you create success, people expect you to continue to manage that and build on that. And that's what Eastern Michigan has to do right now. I think Chris Creighton can do it. He's an excellent football coach. Players love to play for him. And I think he can take that next step. And I think that next step is now. So, 8-4, 9-3, and a bowl victory. That's what success looks like in 2024.
This has been great, Tom. We definitely thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Before we let you go, one last question. Is there anything that we have not talked about that you think the listeners and fans should know about this 2024 Eastern Michigan Eagle football team?
I don't know. I think we covered it for the most part. What's been amazing is I found out the season ticket sales have been the best they've ever been at Eastern Michigan. They're through the roof. And I think sales-wise, they've sold probably triple the amount of tickets that they sold a year ago at this time. And it's really just based, I guess, on hope and encouragement. They really have a nice home schedule. You don't get home till week 3, but you'll have Rich Rodriguez and Jacksonville State coming into the factory. I think St. Francis comes in this year, and then you have a really good MAC schedule. So that's very encouraging that there's such a large fan base out there feeling good about what's going to be happening in Ypsilanti in 2024. So I'm excited to see that. And they keep modifying the stadium. They've upgraded the turf. They're adding new buildings. They hope to add a new indoor practice facility in the coming years. So it's a real great time at Eastern Michigan, kind of a golden era, and we'll see if they can keep improving on that.
Well, thank you for your time tonight, and we look forward to watching Eastern Michigan and their success here in 2024.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.